any questions about the exam? So it's starting, it's going to be open tomorrow at 6 p.m. and will stay open until Friday, 11:59 p.m. Okay? So you have a bit more time. I do realize it's Passover starting today. The Ramadan has been going on for 2 weeks. And it's Easter this weekend, so it's a bit much. I hope you can take it, the exam. I was doing the math. 30 questions in 90 minutes is 3 minutes per question. It doesn't seem that much. 3 minutes is nothing. 26 questions in 120 minutes, so 2 hours. It's a bit more than 4 minutes, which seems long. So there is no perfect, yeah. I think 2 hours is plenty. Most of you don't use the 2 hours. You know, I do have, I get this information on Moodle, right? You know that I know how long it takes you to take the quiz, right? It gives me information about, you know, the average time. Yes, right? I don't want to repeat myself. Please? Wait until after I'm done talking. No, still not. So I know when you start, when you finish, and so on. I know when you submit assignments as well, right? So there is a due date. Please, you have to wait to talk. Thank you. There is a due date on assignments. I usually accept late work. You have to know that most assignments are due on Fridays. The extended due date is Monday, right? And you can use that extended due date 3 times in the semester, right? I told you that at the beginning, but you might have forgotten. And then you can submit later, but then there is a grade, reduction, which is not nothing, but everything, all of that information is in the syllabus. So, okay, on Monday we didn't finish this. We stayed, we are on this, and then we're going to move on to the next. So we talked about dialects and prestige, and so there is multiple questions coming back showing up in Munami in discussion, and what are the differences between languages and dialects? Just take for granted there is none, right? In terms of simply grammar, each dialect is going to have a proper grammar, has a grammar. Each language has a grammar, right? There is no difference in, nothing is superior to the other. There is no such a thing. And so when we compare dialects with each other, again, no dialect is inferior or superior to another, right? But what a country is saying is that we're going to be using a standard, what we consider to be the standard dialect, right? And it's, I don't know where all you're coming from, apart from the US, but it's the case everywhere. If we're talking about India, China, if we're talking about, for example, if you look at Algeria, so it's a country in Africa, so North Africa, and you have Arabic is actually the standard, the language that is being used in government, and it's actually quite a rare, fact, because Algeria is a former French colony, right? And many of the colonies are still using, French or others, French as the language of government communication, right? We don't want that, right, to be clear. We want the language that is being spoken in the country at its origin to be the language of communication in government, at the government level, right? But Algeria did actually, it's one of the rare countries that is using Arabic in local and centralized governments. Okay, So there is the same way that there are no language that are sloppy or lazy, no dialects is sloppy or lazy, right? It's much more that the prestige of the speakers is going to determine the dialect's prestige. It's not the dialect itself, okay? Do you see the difference between those two, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's look at goodwill hunting. There is some, I think, offensive language in that, so just full disclosure. This is this part. You should be comparing the two dialects that are used in that.
I read your book, and Mike was having the same problems that Chad, the stockbroker, was having.
Absolutely right. Right on the button. Good for you, Will. Very nice.
Thank you.
Will, the pressures, and I'm not judging them, I'm not labeling them, but they are destroying your potential. There are no more shenanigans, no more tomfoolery, no more ballyhoo.
You're right. God, I know.
Now, you're not going to get off that easily. Come on, Will. A bit more.
Well, I mean, I do things, you know. I mean,
What kind of things?
I do things that, I mean, I hide from people.
You hide, do you?
No, I mean, I go places, I interact, you know.
Really? What sort of places?
Just certain clubs.
More? That's nice, yes. What sort of clubs?
Like fantasy.
Fantasy.
It's not bad.
Bit more?
It's just something like when you get in there and the music like owns you. It's like that house music. It's like bum, 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 boom, 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 boom. You know, you start dancing.
Boom,
It's
boom,
just
boom, yes.
Yeah. Do you find it hard to hide the fact that you're gay?
What are you talking about? What?
Look, buddy, 2 seconds ago you were ready to give me a jump.
A jump? Are you? I'm terribly sorry to disappoint you.
Hey, look, I don't have a problem with it. I don't care if you putt from the rough.
What are you putting from the rough? What on earth are you talking about?
A different.
So I thought it was offensive language. Is it offensive language? Because so, which dialects are we talking about in this? Where is the action of this movie? Where are those people from? Supposed to be from? The actors, who are they actually interpreting? We're talking about what? It's maybe an old movie now for you, Max.
Will's from South Boston.
Yep. He's from Cambridge, but neighborhood that is poor, right? What about the psychiatrist or psychologist? Did you notice an accent? What type of accent and dialect he was speaking? It was a bit quick, but notice anything? Are they from the same? Yeah, Andrew.
It's like a British vibe.
Yeah, very, very strongly, which could be actually, spoken in northeastern. What else did you hear? Anything else? So there was that opposition between the two, right? Okay. And do you know the story of the movie? Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, so he's working as a janitor at MIT, and he's actually very clever, and then he resolves, I never seen the movie, I think. He resolves the one equation, so he gets that kind of, becomes more visible. But so he's from a low, social class, right? And so there is that opposition between people coming from higher class that are at MIT, right? So, of course, you should consider that we're not saying that only high social class are clever. That's obvious, right? What we're saying is education is not accessible to everyone, right? And it took a long time for, and it's still not the case, that information and education is accessible to everyone, right? And very often it's about information level. So when you have access to, high level, in the society you have access to information, right? I had a student, grad student, who was from France as well as me, and he was coming from the country around my home city. And he was saying that the crucial factor for him was to not have access to information, how to get into grad school and so on, what type of what kind of diploma did you needed and how to access it and so on and so forth. It's very often the case that you don't just have access to information, and that's part of the lack of access to education, right? So it's very often the case. So what we're trying to, to talk about and to kind of show in this class is that there is no such a thing as the right way to speak, right? Everybody has, its proper dialect, language, right? And there is no such a thing as wrong or right dialect, right? Nothing is sloppy or lazy. We'll talk next week about, we'll start talking about dialects in the US, right? Some people, and there is a video, I have to plug in my, there is a video, some people try to change their accents, right? So I want you to think about this for a minute, because the way you speak will have an impact, right, on your public life, on work and so on. How does it have an impact? So we talked about, the association with, there are myths, like very enduring type of myth about the way people speak. You were not very open to disclose what kind of association you have with different type of dialects, and I respect that, because you might not have any. But we all have biases, right? But can you tell me a bit about what kind of impact could it have, right, on your actually social life, on your work life, and so on? What can you tell me about this? What can you imagine could happen? Andrew? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, very often. So one of the things, so Andrew mentioned that some dialects can be seen as unprofessional, right? So one of the things I'm thinking about, one of the dialects that is exemplified in Sorry to Bother You, the movie, where the main actor actually is switching back and forth between two dialects of English, right? African American English and Standard American English, right? Because we have defined that there is what we consider to be a standard. It's not true that it's above anything else, just has been chosen, right, at one point. And the guy in the movie is switching back and forth, right? He's working for a phone company and he's answering the phone, and he says that he's using his white voice, right, when he's talking Standard American English, right? It's very often the case that people are going to be switching. They're going to be actually what we call bi-dialectal, right? So they speak two different dialects, and they can switch back depending on where they are, right? With whom they are actually talking to, right? It's completely possible. On Monday, we were talking about the fact that when you go home, you tend to kind of switch back, right? You don't, restrain your accent as much, and you go back to the syntax that is more associated to your home language, home dialect, than the one that you either it changed or, you were influenced by different factors. But it does happen some people try to change their dialect, and some people are taking actually coach lessons, coach voice lessons to change their dialects. Something that you see, okay? Because it can have a huge impact. We'll talk more about dialects next week, because sometimes it's even more than just having trouble to find work. It's sometimes simply symbol of life or death situations, right? So we'll talk about that. Before we kind of turn off or switch to the next unit, I want to talk a bit about a topic that's been kind of showing up a lot in discussion section, on the boards on Munami, bilingualism. Okay, so I'll give you a few pointers. Yeah, the CC are not working. Let me switch that. No, it's not going to work. Okay. Okay, I want to ask you how many of you are bilingual. So when I ask you whether you are, it means that you can have conversation in more than one language, or you can understand one language and speak and understand the other, right? Okay. How many of you are bilinguals? Yeah, okay. That's a high proportion. Given that there is something like 50 people, it looks like 3/5 of the class is, which is a pretty good one. Okay. When did you become bilinguals? Was it before 6, between 6 and 12, after 12? So I need some volunteers to tell me. Max? Okay.
Like both, since I've been since I was born.
Okay. Since you were born? Okay. So for before 6, yeah.
I grew up learning both of my languages simultaneously.
Okay.
In school.
Okay. Simultaneously. So that's a nice difference. We talk about sequential or simultaneous bilinguals, right?
I was exposed to grammar growing up
Okay.
for a long time, but it never clicked. I could get a few words here and there. When I started learning to read the language and started to write out the language itself,
So later on. Okay.
all the words started having a second. I could see where they're coming from in sentences, and I could start linking things. And so that's
Okay.
when my understanding became better.
Okay. Good. So later on, when you had access to actually reading, and that's interesting. Okay. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Your accent is barely audible, right? So one of the things we talked about is everybody has an accent, right? And if you don't have an L2 accent, you have an L1 accent. So in your native language, you will have an accent because you speak a dialect. In your L2, you're going to have an accent by definition because it's the same way, right? It's different type of characteristic, but you will have an accent. And it's usually around 6 or 7 that we kind of draw that the accent is going to appear on your second language. So very early on, right? The phonology actually, or phonetics closes up. Of course, you're going to find exceptions to this. Some people learn later than 6 and don't have accents, right? Or noticeable L2 accents, I'm saying, right? Okay. How many are sorry that they are bilinguals? Right? So And what about the monolinguals? How sorry are you that you are monolingual? No, you're not even saying, yeah, a bit. Okay. So the point being that being bilinguals is a desirable, right? It's desirable trait, right? It's something that is, that's something, something that people want to have, right, and achieve. Some of the questions about the bilingualism is that it's, that they were showing up in Munami is that bilingualism is actually multiple. So this is coming from a textbook on second language acquisition. Those are the different, it's only the first 2 pages. There are 2 more. This is everything that we are talking about. So we were talking about simultaneous bilingual, right? So it's someone who is exposed to 2 languages at once, right? Sequential means that you get your native exposed to the native language and then to the second one, right? Not at the same time. Think about receptive bilingual. So receptive bilinguals are people who actually can understand their second language, for example, but doesn't necessarily, utter it, speak it, right? It's actually quite frequent, right? There are studies that are being, done and made on receptive bilinguals, or the next step of being a receptive bilingual is what we call heritage speakers. So heritage speakers means that their parents, or one of them, at least, or grandparents, are speaking another language than the one they are speaking, but they understand a few words. They know a few things about the language, right? That's another thing. And people, linguists, study actually heritage speakers to know exactly what's left, right? So there is some kind of systematicity in the way that we forget, right? What part of the language that of the grammar are we forgetting when we are heritage speakers, right? So many things can be said about bilingualism and bilinguals. Lots of myths, right? I don't know if you can read any of these, but there is a lot of myth surrounding bilingualism. Right? There is only one right way to raise a bilingual child. It's not true, right? Yeah. Speaking a second language, it's his own reward. Latino immigrants in the US resist learning English and want everyone to learn to speak Spanish. Press 2 for Spanish, right? I remember that bumper sticker that said, I don't want to have to choose between English and Spanish. It should be only English. And you're like, okay. The truth is it's 50-50, right? The number of speakers, English, Spanish, it's 50-50, right? There is a very high. Sorry?
One is going faster than the other. I think I've heard from someone that just like Latin Americans, like are
It depends on the
growing
dialects.
population in the United States.
You mean the dialects, right?
Not necessarily dialects, but like the population of Latin Americans, they are growing more quickly in the United States and other.
I don't know. If you look at the last National Geographic, they're talking about the birth rate in each country. Look at it. Tell me if they're saying that, because it's really, so the States is at 2.1, I think. It's going down, right? Every single country is going down except Nigeria. India, I think, is not going down, right? Nigeria has the highest. It's 5, the birth rate. 5 child per woman. Anyway, there is a very strong, sentiment about Spanish in the U.S. Bilingual children start to speak later than monolinguals. This is something we've talked about, right? Bilinguals start out of school behind monolinguals and they never catch up, right? And so on and so forth. On the other side of this slide, there are some of the responses, right? So, for example, there is some of the answers that you can give, right? Parents are the expert in this field when raising a child, and we'll talk about this because we consider that there are actually some ways to ensure that the child is actually successful in their bilingual, adventure. Okay. When and where do we become bilinguals? It can be at home, right? So if one or both parents, a parent is speaking another language than the one in the country, right? So we'll talk about this situation. It can be immersion, right? It can be in the classroom, right? Those are some of the options, and it's not, I'm sure I'm not listing everything. We can learn 2 languages at once, or we can actually learn one after the other before the age of 5, right? So one of the things that's interesting is that the definition of bilingualism doesn't include the end state. What does it mean to not include the end state? What does it mean to you? Yep. No, that's not what it means. Think back to this, right? What does it mean not to include the end state?
The definition of bilingualism specifies how well.
What does it mean to be bilingual? It's too many things, right? So there are really high variation. What they're describing is you've been exposed to 2 languages, okay? And then what you do with it and what happens is actually variable, and it doesn't mean you're not bilingual, right? So being bilingual means everything, right? Okay, so let's look at a bit of what happens when you're exposed to 2 languages at once, right? Bilingual first language acquisition, so 2 languages from birth. They tend to be independent from each other, right? So you're building 2 trees. And they're relatively independent, and they tend to be balanced, right? Okay. Those slides and data are from Barbara Pearson's book on raising a bilingual child. Okay. So it can happen that 2 languages, even from birth, can be, unequal. Okay. So it depends on the type and the amount of exposure, right? So imagine a situation where you have 2 caregivers and one each speaks a different language to you, right? That's one option. It could be that there is a bigger family, right, on one side, so you get more exposure. It's possible that, for example, the grandmother is taking care of you on one side, not the other. You get more exposure to that language, right? It depends a bit about the school and the care situation too, right? So you can have, it's very common to have unequal, actually, exposure and type of amount of exposure. Okay. Second language acquisition. So this is what we consider second language acquisition, is that you start with one and you start with the second later on, okay? And so the question of the dependence of the 2 languages is kind of out there, right? We would consider in general that the first language is going to be the main tree, and you're building around that tree with the second language, right? So there is that question of how balanced the later should be, but it can change over time depending on your situation, right? If it's later on that you're exposed to that second language, it will be less balanced, right? So you're going to have less exposure, less early too, right? But the thing is, it's possible for a second language, an L2, to overtake the first language. Can you think about a situation like this? What kind of situation, social, would justify something like that. Yeah.
Like if you move to a new country that
Yep.
like is not exposed to anyone who's your element
Exactly.
language,
Yes.
you might get less strong.
Yeah. So if the dominant language, so meaning it's usually the language being spoken in the country, changes, right? So you move to another country, right? It often is the case that the L2 will take over the L1, right? Because one language is usually dominant, right? It's the social language, okay? Interrupt me with any questions if you need, by raising your hand when I mean interrupt me. Okay. So we hear very often that bilinguals are slower to develop, okay, because they have more, they're exposed to more, right? More data, more amount, right? More vocabulary, right? So there are tests actually that, kids, so when you have kids that are bilingual in the English, American system, school system, they're getting tested for. So it was the case for my kids. And they actually are evaluating, right, how many words they know, right? So the bilingual tests are much better now because we know much more, but before it wasn't so great, right? So let me give you an example, okay? So if you speak two languages, Spanish and English, you're gonna have a set of words that you know that are only in Spanish. Very often it's gonna be home vocabulary, right? For example, any kind related to, food, cooking, right? Clothes and so on. So we're gonna have a certain number of list of words, lexical items, in the home language, right? And then you're gonna have certain specific words that you only know in English, right? The English singlets, it's related to school, right? The math vocabulary, for example, geography, whatever you learn at school, okay? But there is a third thing. There is actually the Spanish-English doublets, right? Okay. So a kid that is bilingual cannot be tested only on one, right? Language. Has to be tested on both. Because his knowledge is both together, right? And even more, right? We have to think about not only the words that they know, but the concepts that they know, right? So, meaning that when you know a word, you just don't know just a word, you know a concept, right, that is associated to it, okay? The big question in bilingualism is, do you have two concepts? No, not the right way. You have a single concept, and to each you have associated a version for your first language and a version for your second language? Or do you have everything double, right? It's pretty obvious that which way should go, right? But what's really interesting is if we only test kids on first home language or second, right, we're losing actually half of the information. If we only test them on English, we're missing all of the Spanish, singlets. If we only test them on Spanish, we're missing all the English singlets, right? If you compare with monolingual kids, right, there is a clear divide, right? When we actually are looking at what they know, they're able to express in conceptual, right? So meaning, what do we do? Do you know a bit about this, how we test kids? What do we show them? Right? We show them pictures and they have to name those objects, right? And we actually don't care what language they are going to be using, right? This is how we actually are accounting for everything that they know. Not only the Spanish, not only the English, everything together, right? So the conceptual knowledge, right, is going to be the same as for monolinguals, but it's split in two, right, between the two languages. This is why it's very crucial to have both, right? So expressive vocabulary is different from, you know, what they can understand. Expressive is what they're able to utter. What words do they know? Can they pronounce, right? And there is also, of course, everything that they understand, you know? Okay. There is still that big question because, so Grosjean a long time ago said the bilingual is not two monolinguals in one person, right? So, for example, bilingual Spanish-English, we all know, does someone speak Spanish here? Can you pronounce this word? No. No, this. Thank you. So, so a child may know the word in Spanish, but not its translation in English, which is beans, right? And is there any other? No, no other Spanish words. Thank you, Francisco.
There's also resta.
Ah, yes. Oh, yeah, yes, for the subtraction. Very good. So the child might know subtraction in English, but not resta in Spanish, right? It's very often the case. It's going to be very specific to actually where they learned, right? So math is going to be in school. So they're living in the States, it's going to be in English, right? There's been an effort to try to revive bilingual education, but for a long time it was actually shut out of the curriculum completely, in Massachusetts as well, right? So what Francisco is referring to is the US is actually a very monolingual country. It's very true. So you might not feel concerned by this, you might be bilingual, but when we look at the world in general, right, people speak many languages, right? I think I'll talk about this before the end of the semester, but when we can look at different countries and ask them what their mother tongue is, right? And the higher, you know, the linguistic diversity index, it means that when you meet two people, the chance that they don't speak the same mother tongue is the highest, right? So Papua, I think New Guinea was the highest, and before that it was actually, I think, was it Cameroon? In you know, many African countries have tens, hundreds of, you know, local indigenous language. It's one of the highest continent with the highest indigenous languages. Anyway, I'm going off, but there's been a huge effort to undermine bilingual education in the US. It's a constant struggle, right? Okay. One of the things that is interesting is that when people do badly their jobs, so meaning when they don't know how to evaluate bilingual children, they tend to be actually, you know, that's what you hear, that bilingual children are falling behind. But you have to be able to actually ask for both language what their level of knowledge is, right? There is an impact of dialects as well in school systems, right? For a very long time, I think it's better now. People speaking African American English were misdiagnosed as having specific language impairment, right? We'll talk a bit about this because the grammar, African American English grammar, for example, there is no S on the third person, right? And that's one of the things that SLI children do, right? Because they drop their morphemes, right? They don't express the plural. They have trouble. We talked about that, right? So we know that this is different. But African American English is a different grammar from the standard one. And they were characterized as having a specific language impairment. So this is crucial. The knowledge of dialects, the knowledge of bilingualism is crucial. Okay. There are many bilingual studies. And so in Europe, if you look at, for example, Belgium has 2 official languages, but both are not represented in all areas. And 3 of 4 children with reported bilingual input become bilingual, right? Look at, for example, this study from 2009. If you look at the societal and non-societal language, this is the Flanders study, and that's the Japan survey, right? Societal language, when the parents are speaking together in the societal language, meaning the dominant language, right? Child speaks 2 languages, 36% for the Flanders survey, 59% for the Japan one, right? And when it's the non-societal language, how strong it is actually for the child to have a chance to be, equal bilingual, right? 93% and 100%. So what can we actually understand from this? What's better? What seems to be better for the parents, the caregivers, to be speaking to the child? So you have to think in terms of amount of exposure, right? If the parents are talking the dominant language that is spoken in the country, the child is getting just more input on that, right? Whereas if the parents, the caregivers, are speaking the non-dominant language, the child has more chance to be fully bilingual, meaning, equal. Okay? Do you see that? Yeah. Okay. One of the questions that is related to what I was talking about vocabulary is we don't know if the bilingual child in his head there are 1 or 2 systems, right? What do you think about this? Do you think there are 2 systems in the mind of the child, or the bilingual, or only 1? What are the arguments? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's very true. That's one of the things that people don't understand. The child doesn't know. He just identify 1 language to a person, but they don't know they're speaking English or Spanish or Japanese. They just don't know. There is no reason they should, right? So what we know is that the child is attaching 1 language to 1, for example, parent, right? They don't know they're speaking Swahili to 1 and Xhosa to the other 1 parent, for example, right? You don't know that. The child doesn't know that, okay? And I do agree that I think concepts-wise, right, what they are coming up is a single concept for both language, right? There is more to be said, of course, in terms of the system. What system is in place in the child's mind, right? We haven't talked very much about this because the class is not about, phonetic and phonology, but we consider that children form separate phonemes, so sounds, and rules for different languages, right? So they're going to have 2 grammars that is associated with each, 1 for each language. But some things are in common. And think about when we talked about sign language, bimodal, which is the equivalent to bilingual, right? Bimodal acquisition works the same, exactly the same, right? I told you before that when we actually are testing out people on ASL, the same areas are actually activated in the brain, right? When we're signing, understanding a sentence is the same as with spoken language, right? Predictions. So one reading on this of what works best for, take it with a grain of salt. You might have a different opinion on this, but and 1 parent, 1 language is not the best strategy because it actually depends on what the dominant language is, right? Again, because the amount of exposure is going to be crucial, right? that parents should talk to each other in the non-dominant language. But sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. One of the things that you probably know about this, bilinguals are better at some things, right? And I want you to let me know why this could be, how this could be explained. So they're better at, rational reasoning, right? They are better at inhibitory control. So what is inhibitory control, first of all? Some of you might know. Right, so when you have two conflicting information, right, you have to be able, and that's the case when you have actually, you speak two languages, right? You have two conflicting information, and you have to pick. You have to be able to kind of lower down that information and pick the other one. So inhibitory control, which is happening in the frontal cortex, L2 are better, okay, at this. What we know, it's executive functioning. I did mention that, right? The other thing is,
So what's L2?
the second language.
Oh.
Yeah. So we kind of draw that distinction. Second language acquisition is sequential acquisition, so it happens later on. It's not simultaneous acquisition. But actually, L2 does encompass bilingualism. Yeah. We know with studies shows that brain generation is delayed by 5 years in bilinguals. So I want you to tell me, why is that so? Why is it so, according to you? There is an answer that is complex, but it's there. Okay. It's part of the answer, I agree. The other answer is that in bilinguals, those pathways are stronger, right? Because you have more connections. So actually, it's just that simply, it's going to take twice the time to get rid of those pathways. So it's not that, they're so different. It's just that there are actually multiple pathways. And when you see, so indeed, what we call, for example, pruning, the fact that we get rid of pathways that are not being in use, right? It's the same, but when we get older, there is brain degeneration, right? But if those pathways are actually twice as connected, right, it's going to take twice as long. It's not that very complicated, right? It's very easy to understand. So I forgot the beats today, as you can tell. So when you come on Monday, you have to tell me, I need that many beads. Don't be over greedy, though. Okay. Just tell me the truth, please. Okay. So the exam is on starting tomorrow until Friday night, okay? Yep. Thanks, everyone.